Yeah, this is a great opportunity to check in, Dan, I think, with updates on our video series, the Astrology to 2020s. I think the purpose of that series was us examining this basket. I mean, that was kind of the core idea was we looked at Andre Barbault's transit, July 2026, these outer planet transits, the so-called Barbault planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Those are the 5 planets he was interested in. And they make this very elegant configuration that perfects or, is at its height in July 2026. So our series was trying to, introduce people to the various features of that and take a look at some of the mundane themes, et cetera. And so, I think it's good to check in. That's why I wanted to have this talk with you, is just to see where we're at in terms of what those themes are, how they might be unfolding, so-called updates. First of all, I just want to welcome you here and thank you for agreeing to join me. It's very kind of you. How are you doing?
Doing great, SJ. It's good to talk again. And yeah, no, I agree. It's been more than 6 months since we made that series now. So we're 6 months closer to 2026 and all of that really interesting astrology that we talked so much about. So yeah, I think it's a good time.
Yeah, and it would you agree that the world has moved quite fast since, October 2022 to where we are now, June 2023? I mean, a lot has happened, don't you think? I mean, big changes, big news stories. Pluto came into Aquarius. Saturn is astrologically a lot's happened. Saturn into Pisces, Pluto in Aquarius, now back into Capricorn. But even in the world, so many things have happened. Is there any big story that was maybe on your mind more than others, or anything that comes right to mind when I say a lot happened in the world that would jump out first for you?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a while ago since we made those videos now. Time just moves so fast these days, right? What jumps out? I mean, I know, we talked a fair bit about Pluto moving to Aquarius, and we had that transit coming 2.5 months from the end of March, and that was a really interesting time with all the AI stuff that came out over the course of that month. It was just an explosion, and it was like suddenly the world was realizing this stuff might just change everything, and at the same time there was all those strange stories about UFOs and unidentified aerial phenomena coming out. And then at the same time, we've also seen so much shift geopolitically, in relation to the conflict, or maybe not so much the conflict itself, but kind of everything surrounding the conflict, perhaps, because the conflict is, it's being fought within the borders of Ukraine, mostly in terms of the weaponry, in terms of the military maneuvers and so on, but it's kind of much bigger than that. I think that's something that we touched on in our video series, and something that's kind of become quite evident, I would say.
Yeah, it's been big. And I know that people out there should just be aware. Dan will release on his World Astrology Report channel. Subscribe to it if you haven't already. Probably the best astrology channel for mundane astrology that's out there. But we are going to talk about that Pluto and Aquarius transit in depth. Dan has a video that will be out at some point, probably in July at some point, where he and I go deeper into some of those specifics around those stories from the first 2.5 months of Pluto and Aquarius. So look for that. I want to pivot here, Dan, and ask you just as a way into this conversation, the basket. Andre Barbault talks about how it's going to be the best astrology of the century. These elegant outer planet configurations to him implied some kind of major, almost utopian in the language that he writes about it, that it'll be this uplifting of humanity into this new age of global civilization, something like this, the global civilization. Can you, I know you've been reading that recently, maybe tell us exactly what he was saying, if you can? And then at the end, the other thing I'm curious about is, what are your thoughts on, how true this might be, given that we're 6 months closer? I mean, do you see this more utopian vision emergent, or are there elements of that? Or what's your sense here of Barbault's kind of optimism?
$1 million question, I think. Yeah, so let's have a look at what he actually said, because I do have the quote up here. So he said, talking of that basket configuration, but this period of crisis of 2020 is resolved in 2026, when Uranus becomes sextile to Saturn, Neptune in Aries, and trine to Pluto in Aquarius. We will then have 9 ascending cycles and the most beautiful configuration of the 21st century. The New World civilization, whose beginnings appeared around the year 2000, is taking off here. This entry into the second quarter of a century bears the stamp of the achievement of a new age of humanity. The central and harmonic position of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is above all expressive of the promotion of the lower strata of the world population, of the significant rise in the standard of living of the underprivileged, of a victory over the poverty won in solidarity without precedent. So that's what Barbault says, and as you say, it's a utopian vision. And so sitting where we are now in the middle of 2023, with this terrible war going on in Europe, and with the world, I would say, still feeling really divided, and as divided as it has maybe since the Cold War. It's where we're sitting now. I don't know about you, SJ, but I just feel like it's a little bit hard to envision where how this utopian vision could come to pass. And I'd say there's a couple of possibilities, right? I mean, firstly, Barbault could be wrong. All astrologers get things wrong sometimes, and even great astrologers like Barbault, it's not inconceivable. But at the same time, this is an astrologer who devoted his entire life to astrology, studying cycles, studying history. So at the same time, we have to take what Barbault says pretty seriously. I do. He studied astrology when he wrote this a hell of a lot longer than I've been practicing astrology. So I respect his opinion. So the other possibility, of course, is that Barbault is right, and that this incredibly utopian vision of a much fairer world, particularly as it pertains to the less privileged portion of the population of the planet, which he refers to in that quote, that somehow this vision is actually what's coming in 2026. And then the question is, well, how can that be? How are we going to get from what we're seeing now to there? And this is a really difficult question to answer, because I don't think the answer is obvious by any means. And I'm really doing my best to try and figure out what that possibility or what that thing could be. But I'm sort of bearing those two possibilities in mind. Barbault might not be right, and we can maybe interpret the basket in a different way, or he is right, in which case it's almost like there could be some sort of deus ex machina, that's coming, something that we don't know about. Because I have a couple of thoughts really about that 2026 astrology, because there's two major components to that. There's the flowing, amazing configuration, the basket configuration, which you saw and gave it that name because of all the flowing aspects that we see. So we have these slow moving out planets, and they're in trines, they're in sextiles. And so because these are flowing aspects, that suggests that what's coming isn't something completely new. It's things that are already in process that are kind of being expressed at that time. And we could look at all the individual cycles which are making aspects to sort of try and break it down. But just to say broadly that these flowing aspects suggest that there's something in flow which is going to be in generally kind of expressive at that time. And then the other component is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction itself at 0 degrees of Aries, the first degree of the whole zodiac. And that, to me, looks like that could be more where the deus ex machina is coming from, the new thing, the thing that we can't see coming. That's what sort of That's what I'm thinking essentially about 2026 right now.
Cool. Well, I want to come in here because it's very interesting what you say, and just share quickly some of my thoughts to add here is, and I think we look back. What Barbault says is look back to the beginning of the century, and this is where we'll find the beginnings of whatever comes to fullness here for the second quarter of the century. And clearly, the beginning of the century has the internet emerge as a global phenomenon. I mean, even in places in the world, in America, the internet comes to prominence mid-1990s. Saturn and Pisces, basically, in the mid-1990s, is when these businesses start growing, and you have the growth of like America Online, where everybody's getting online, downloading, things very slowly, but still, it was there. But in other parts of the world, like the so-called global south or 2.5, not the so-called third world, which is pejorative name, but, these places that are less developed, let's just say, the internet really comes online even in the aughts. It doesn't spread and start this kind of global growth of the internet until even a decade later, or even into the teens, really. And so my initial thinking, or my current thinking, is this relates to the technological transformation of reality vis-a-vis the internet, and the ability for the internet to raise people up out of poverty. You see this in just the ability for the internet to make commerce flow, like in China and America. The Chinese miracle, how many Chinese were raised out of poverty? I mean, these are the official numbers that I think the West and China both agree with, that there's like billions, maybe even, risen out of poverty based largely upon the exchange of economic activity between the more developed Western world and then the Chinese manufacturing base. But the internet is what allows the flow of that exchange, because it greases the wheels effectively of like making orders and all of the things that are necessary for that expansion economically. So, there's that side of it. The other side is that you allow people to produce with content creators, right? You have the internet being a content creation machine, and this is common all over the world. You can type in things, start your own businesses. I mean, you and I both make videos. And so you can go directly to the consumers all over the world with whatever your product is, or with whatever your idea is. But I think there is, no matter what happens with the war, let's just hope it's not like a evisceration of human civilization. But if it's just something that is tough, but we get through, it seems to me that there's an inevitable technological overtaking of the economic system in a way that allows for, I think objectively, we're already in it, we've already seen it, the uplifting of the impoverished in ways that, that are almost inconceivable maybe 50 years ago. And the last thing I'll just say, we talked about this in our series, but, you got the Library of Alexandria here. If you want to learn, coding, you can do that. If you want to learn, any skill, anybody can do it with just these, and these are all over the world. I mean, everybody can get one. And I think this goes right to the next point. The next thing I want to ask you about is that when we talk about Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces, certainly there is this idea that we tripped upon: new languages, new time, new calendrics. There's something so fundamental to how humans operate that this conjunction at 0 Aries really brings to the forefront. Currently, we have Neptune, Saturn, and Pisces, and what we've seen, you mentioned the rise of AI with Pluto's first stint into Aquarius, and there really is a sense of unreality as these machines are dominating, online spaces. You have things like Midjourney. I just saw recently, it was Midjourney. Now you can Zoom, and like Midjourney is not just creating images, it's creating whole worlds that then you can use video to kind of create these whole worlds in real time. There is a sense of, we've seen with like that Pope jacket, the puffy Pope jacket image that went around. There's a whole series of these where they do look real. And so we're in this kind of maybe Saturn, Neptune unreality phase with AI. But what about the possibility of something like AGI? That would be a new language, or something so fundamental with Saturn and Neptune at Aries 1, or some kind of, where then humans have to return to either like a primal human, that would be Mars and Aries, some kind of fundamental animal that's instinctual, or that we just set up this whole new vision for reality, that is the wild card you describe. And then now we move into some kind of partnership with AGI to really uplift everybody into some kind of pure utopia. One more thing is that guy that is injecting himself with his son's blood. You know, what if, so there's that story that's come out, but even like AI I just saw was being used to diagnose things in ways that are so far beyond what anybody could imagine. I mean, there could be revolutions in healing that keep the bodies alive, and then simultaneously the cloud upload of the consciousness, something like this. I mean, just to quickly, I'm going to turn it over to you. I mean, this Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces, the phase where we're in now, which is very confusion, that may give way to some kind of fundamental breakthrough that then could be part of what Barbault would be, you know, foreshadowing or getting out in front of.
One thing that we've talked about a lot is the just how Neptunian these times are. We have Neptune in Pisces, where regardless of whether or not you think it rules Pisces, is obviously strong. There's such a strong affinity between what, you know, Neptune's all about and the sign of Pisces. And so we're at this time where it's so hard to see where things are going in pretty much all facets of the world, whether we're talking about the war or whether we're talking about the promise of technology. You know, there's that sense of confusion. There's that sense of a lack of clarity. Are these technologies a good thing? Are they going to lead us to utopia, or, you know, are they leading us to, you know, the opposite? Are they actually deleterious to human life and human happiness? I think that we might have a clearer idea of that, and maybe of some of the answers to those questions once Neptune, Saturn, once they get out of Pisces, and we reach 2026. I think one thing that's clear with AI is that we're seeing quite regularly, we're seeing new uses for AI. That just yesterday I saw this quite frightening video about how they've essentially figured out how to use AI to interpret and read your thoughts. They can use it to read Wi-Fi signals and reconstruct people in rooms and know how, you know, how many people are in a room and how is each one positioned. You know, really crazy things that you just couldn't have imagined. And it seems to me that it's quite likely that process is going to continue. In fact, it may even accelerate. As you know, right now we're still very much in the hype phase of AI, and that'll probably continue for a while. But people are increasingly putting it to use and for different uses. And so maybe that's where the Deus Ex Machina is coming from. There's just they figure out some uses for AI and for network technology, which does somehow feel like it's led us to a better world. I mean, I would love that to be true. I don't know 100% if it will be, but if Barbault is correct, then something is going to get us there. And it is clear to me that the 2026 basket has a lot to do with technology. And the reason I say that is if you look at the individual cycles that are reaching major aspects then. So if you look at Pluto, Neptune, this was a cycle going with the conjunction in 1891, 1892, where we have the birth of things like flight. We have alternating current invented by Tesla. We have radio. We have these incredible technologies which allow instant connection or quick connection, so we say, around the whole world. And then if you look at the Pluto-Uranus cycle, which is reaching a trine, that takes us back to 1965. This is kind of the era when actually the first iteration of the internet around this time comes into being. ARPANET, we have the transistor and so on suddenly getting put into use, and that was a truly important period technologically as well. And then if we look at the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, because the Uranus and Neptune will be reaching a sextile. And they're going to be, this is a sextile that goes back to 93 when the last conjunction happened, which of course is pretty much the time when the World Wide Web is born and is built around the world. So all of those cycles that are reaching a major aspect, they're all they all have something to do with these technological developments, and it's all somehow coming together at that time. And yeah, I think you could be right. Could AGI be that thing? Because it probably is something that we don't quite have yet, but things are changing so quickly and exponentially that it's something that brings all of that together by 2026, and that is, really does change things. So, maybe AGI is it. It's something we've got to reckon with as a possibility.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. An acknowledgement and awareness of those broader outer planet cycles, because they really do speak to this rise and this technological age that we're in. And of course, we have to mention here that we are also in the so-called age of air with Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, something you've talked about so much, and that, I've mentioned some too, that really does. We're fully in that now, where Saturn and Jupiter will be conjoining only in air signs. And so it brings the air element to the forefront, which of course is technology. It's Mercury, it's Saturn, it is Libra. It's all about technology and political structures that support the advancement of technological civilization, namely the Mongol Empire. There was tweets that I saw you made recently where commentators are saying this new Mongol Empire emerges because of the rise of BRICS and how more and more nations want to join BRICS. This all happened since the last time we talked. And in our videos, we actually alluded strongly to BRICS. That was something that I thought was the most interesting in terms of what we described and then what reality brought to us in terms of a match. But this kind of geopolitical rearrangement that's based on technology, and it's based on empires that emerge, or the connectivity of people from these new technologies. So to come in and apply it maybe more specifically, like AI, for example, I've been using it to code. I mean, I'm doing like PHP, Python, all kinds of stuff I never would have even had any awareness of how to implement. I wanted to, but these AIs have given me the power to do it. I bring that up because you can think about across industry just how fast things can emerge, where the will of the human mind can be made manifest, because the technology gives us a way forward, a way to do it fast. And I think that on the one hand, this could be constructive of empires that emerge that are beneficial for human beings. But on the other hand, there's danger in that. What if in the wrong hands? Is it kind of a matrix style enslavement? People talk about this, central bank digital currencies, all of the digital ID stuff that's come online rapidly. And this is my concern. And I want to bring it to more the political, geopolitical destabilization now, because I think when things change rapidly, there are old players who don't adapt, old structures that may fall away. Pluto and Aquarius, we know, is resisting what was the center gets pushed out by the margins. And, we know, I think more than ever now, that the Pax Americana is under pressure. Pax Americana may be, falling away, and what will replace it, if it so-called does? Is it BRICS? Is it some kind of new techno network of trade that emerges, where you have these global techno networks of trade? I think that we have to think about the Pluto return of America, that now it's like 15 months back in Capricorn. It will come back into Aquarius, then back into Capricorn one more time, finally entering Aquarius. That's a key part of the basket. You saw in America the arrest of opposition leader Trump, which, maybe this is a minor point given the gravity and the kind of high level nature of what we're talking about here. But I think, so is there a breakdown of like legislative democracy in the face of these tools? Because like that tool you described, I mean, in the hands of governments where you can use Wi-Fi to map everything, that doesn't seem like democracy really would matter much anymore in the face of the strength of tools like that. If the thoughts can be read, does voting even matter? You just vote in real time all the time, something like this. And so, and then I'm going to come back and pivot here, but my sense is that whatever the Aries that emerges, remember Aries is this kind of primal outer action. I'm wondering how much of it might be human beings reconfiguring ourselves against how powerful this technology is, deploying it, in a very positive way, but maybe protecting ourselves even from, some people may turn it off. Why would you have Wi-Fi if it's mapping everything? I think there may be movements to turn it off. But where do you see this kind of geopolitical, what would, maybe this is the question, what could arise geopolitically that would support the positive Barbault vision? What kind of new government structures or new international, reconfigurations may emerge here? Or anything else you want to, I know I said a lot there, but anything else you would want to add?
Yeah, no, that's all really, really interesting. I think, so going to what we've seen in the last few months is we've seen a lot of noise about BRICS, and not just noise, but there have been real developments in that area, where we really do have more and more countries wanting to join this grouping. And then there's the question of de-dollarization, trades happening in different currencies other than the dollar, using the yuan, or countries using their own country currencies and so on. There's no doubt that these things are happening. The question is, how significant are they? Because you'll find sort of quote unquote mainstream commentators, particularly in the West, who'll dismiss the importance of the BRICS and say, well, it's just a talking shop at this point, and the dollar's still by far the most used currency, and there's some element of truth in that, but I think it's very clear that let's put it like this: why are all these countries queuing up to join this grouping now, this alternative international structure? That there's obviously some motivation there. There's some desire to move away from the current international framework that we have. And so I'm wondering if, I don't think BRICS is like the new, UN or anything like that. It won't be BRICS itself, or maybe BRICS is the kind of the birthing organization of something new that perhaps by 2026 or later in this decade will start to look more like a kind of alternative framework for kind of global governance, shall we say. But it's hard to see how we get from that to Barbault's vision, or this very utopic vision, because that vision would really imply that that everybody, that everybody, or the different blocks in the world, do come together and into one kind of unified structure somehow. So that they're, if Barbault is right, then there would be some process whereby perhaps more and more countries from the global south join this organization, and it reaches some kind of, it'll reach a critical mass where it will start to constitute a new internationalist structure, which may somehow change how the world is governed and bring bring the whole world together somehow. It seems, again, it seems unlikely right at this moment, but things are changing quickly, and that's still 2 years away, more than 2 years, 2.5 years. So a lot can change, and perhaps we are just watching the seeds of some new international structure growing now, and that's one possibility which we have to reckon with.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've seen some recent stories that the BRICS are considering adopting Bitcoin for cross-border trade. Now, these are Bitcoin, people that tend to disperse these kind of rumors. I don't know how confirmed that is, but just coming back, when we think about what would an alliance of nations, if they were to pick something like Bitcoin, which is a decentralized, trustless, permissionless network that allows for value to be stored and then transferred, that could be something that would match Barbault's vision, because it's not owned by anyone. It's actually a non-owned distributed ledger where you have proof of work of computers all over the world. This is kind of a little bit utopian, and I'm not saying that Bitcoin is it. I'm certainly would be rooting for something like that, because I do think it has the power to certainly take away nations' ability to export inflation to other countries or to their populace, which makes people poorer. And this is a lot of the reason why the BRICS nations are wanting to get away from the dollar, is that it's been used as a weapon, a political weapon. and a weapon of control. I mean, a country that can print its own currency can get out of debt, and the national debt is not an issue if you can print the money to pay the obligations like the United States can. And then you have other countries that don't have that ability, and they get locked into these debt cycles that are very harmful. You can look at something like Economic Hitman, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that book by John Perkins, and there's others that describe this process. So, but this is what I want to come to now is the idea that, wars are fought over money. I mean, and we can look at the war in Europe now. A lot of people talk about the richness of the Ukrainian natural resource base. You have oil, you have the wheat. It can produce wheat in 2 growing seasons, apparently. It's a geopolitical center for something like a new Silk Road that would run right through Central Asia and then right through the so-called borderlands, which I think you may know this because I know you spent some time there, but I've always said Ukraine actually means borderlands in Russian. That, that might just be a myth, but it does fit right between Europe and Asia, right in this kind of crossroads, such that if you can control that area, you really have an economic advantage in terms of the Asia into Europe trade network. So there may be an economic component of the war that we're seeing. And as we get closer, and this is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, is that I'm really optimistic. Part of me is very optimistic because of tech can revolutionize, AI can empower and can lift people up. Even UBI, something like this, I'm open to, as long as you're not forcing people to, you're restricting people to get the UBI. If it's freely available to all citizens, that's a beautiful thing. The abundance that machines provide, even John Keynes wrote about this, that you would eventually have to give the citizenry money because labor is not needed because the machines do the labor. But wars are fought over money. This is one common belief. And as we get into 2025 and 2026, and these economic shifts start happening faster, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's a new BRICS currency, a basket of currency that the BRICS adopt, I am concerned. This is the one transit that concerns me the most about Barbault's vision not being true, which is Uranus into Gemini, into 2025, and then for the next 7-8 years there into like 2022, 2032, 2033, it's always timed crises, global crises, or, really global crises. If you go back to the Revolutionary War, that's England and the Americas, and the French were involved, and the Russians were even involved in the Revolutionary War in America. You have the American Civil War, which there was also stuff going on in Europe, of course, always. You have, and some people believe the Civil War was also other parties from Europe were involved in the American Civil War. I think that's pretty clean history. But then you have World War II, which is the last major global conflict that rearranges everything. So we have to brave Uranus and Gemini here very, very soon. And I'm concerned about it. It's the thing that makes me, if I had to not sleep at night because of a transit, it's this one. Because what if there is some kind of global conflagration? The Neptune Jupiter conjunction in Pisces did not bring peace to Crimea as it did in the 19th century. And so now we're in this war that appears to be going to go on for a long time. If Uranus comes into Gemini and that's still happening and the escalations are still happening and China and Russia are still growing closer together, it doesn't look good, does it? And so what are your thoughts just to close here? I mean, I don't want to end on a down note, and we can certainly talk as long as you want, but I mean, how much does this concern you? What do you think are the, if Barbault's right, let's hope he is, how might that look for peace in the world? Or what would Uranus and Gemini mean this round such that it's not horrific, that it's maybe more Barbaultian? I mean, any thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, this is something I'm thinking about a lot, because we have these kind of conflicting testimonies. We have the Barbault basket, and Barbault's vision for what that is. And then we have this pattern that we've seen over and over again with Uranus and Gemini, and the United States taking part in these big transformative armed conflicts. So there's different scenarios, I think. That's how I'm trying to think about things. What are the scenarios that allow the symbolism to be true? And so that's kind of what we're sort of groping for here, because what we're trying to do is extremely difficult, predict that far into the future on a global level. So what's one possibility that comes to mind is that 2026 is perhaps symbolizing the coming together of some sort of global structure and vision, which is sort of utopian in the way that Barbault describes, but at the same time challenges the old order to the point where that old order then resists or wants to reverse or prevent what it stands for. And so we have something coming into being in 2026, which then ignites a conflict afterwards. That's one possible scenario. But then the other scenario we've kind of discussed already is that perhaps Barbault is right, and we have some fully utopian vision which does actually bring the whole world together. Then perhaps that breaks the pattern. We don't see another war with Uranus and Gemini. There are other possibilities for that transit, and something that I'm thinking about. It's a bit more of an out there possibility, but it's one we talked about in our video series. It's one I've talked about a few times, and that is the whole UFO phenomenon, UAPs, and all of that. So to me, we're seeing this something resembling a process of disclosure taking place. I think right now, again, there's a lot of confusion about, is this thing real? But we have had the US government releasing footage of these strange objects. We've just had this whistleblower during Pluto and Aquarius emerging, who's saying, the US government has craft that it's captured and is, trying to deconstruct and understand how they work, or whatever it is that they're doing. That's sort of another possibility for a kind of Deus ex machina, I think. Because if this process is for real, if this is not just kind of Neptunian psyops and nonsense, then that would kind of put 2026 on the horizon as perhaps a time where there's going to be a big development in that area, or a big revelation. Uranus is a planet of revelations. Perhaps with Uranus in the seventh house in Gemini, the seventh house of the US Sibley chart, it could be that instead of a war this time, we're looking at an encounter with the Uranian. What's more Uranian than beings from other places or dimensions or whatever it is? And, it sounds completely crazy, but we're really seeing these kind of stories coming into the news now. So we have to take it seriously, and we have to consider that it's a possibility. This could be the game changer as well. And that's one possibility, one scenario to me as to how we can see something better emerging in 2026. And simultaneously, Uranus does its revelatory, surprising thing in Gemini, and it's the encounter with the other, perhaps, is the seventh house of the Sibley chart. That's something that I'm wondering about.
Yeah, and for me, I think you're wise to point out there's competing testimony. I think it's wise to point out cycles can be true simultaneously. I mean, there may be war that happens, even a revolutionary war, even World War II. It does affect everybody, but it's only when you look at the percentages, most places are relatively stable other than the front. I mean, it does change life for sure, but I was seeing videos recently in like America in, 1944, the premiere of like a new Humphrey Bogart film or something. I mean, people were going to watch cinema. There is some normalcy that can be retained largely through the majority of the world. And so you wonder if you can simultaneously have revolutionary tech coming online, even if there is a world war, such that whatever's born is the basis for something transformational. 1, 2, maybe something will be born that will solve the war. So World War II ends with the drop of the nuclear bomb by the Americans on the Japanese, something I'm very sad about. And I'm not going to launch into a tirade here, but I think there's some moral questions, but it certainly ended things immediately. And then the whole world was now in a new age based upon that technology. So the technology accelerated the completion and then set up the structure of the new age. So that could happen. And so to have both of these things true. And then the third thing I think about is that Barbault could be just off by a few years, maybe what emerged, or actually it's common in wars that the institutions that will dominate after wars actually start during the war, and it could even be sometimes kind of early. So you might have a new global institutional structure like the UN or the League of Nations that emerges organizationally in 2026, but then it's not until 2032 that really takes over as the Uranus and Gemini transit completes and the war is over, or whatever it's going to be. So that's another way that it can go. But I'm going to say this as my kind of final thought. Let's hope that the elegance of the basket, and as Barbault mentions, that these are expanding cycles. What he means by that is that of the 10 cycles, I think 9 are in the phase that are waxing. So, and it implies that it's a growth period for the collective, and that we're moving into something new and growing. And let's hope that this could be, evolving beyond the need for world war. The great vision of post-World War II era and the purpose of the UN was that we solve world war. We don't have world war. That's why the EU exists. Now, this might sound Pollyanna, and I can't, as it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, geez, this does sound a little Pollyanna and cliche, but I want to end with something like that, because I don't think we have to see the war like you're describing. No one wants it. As you said earlier, you were like, what if there's no war? I'm like, yes, that's what I want. I want that to be not something that happens, or that whatever war ends fast. And so I just think that that's the option I'm rooting for, and that I want to throw in here in terms of my final thoughts. Any final thoughts, first of all, and then second of all, you can actually, any final thoughts from you about any of these topics, or anything you would want to, share here that you think is important as we get closer to the basket, and as we've moved beyond our initial video series, and now we're kind of following it as it unfolds. Anything you think is relevant?
Well, just maybe to think about the Saturn Neptune conjunction again. That's coming in 2026, and what does Saturn Neptune mean? Because we have this unusual combination of a planet that's all about the real form, that which can be made manifest in Saturn, and then we have Neptune, this planet of the numinous and the imaginary and the imaginal, and so on. And we're bringing those two planets together, and so. What have we seen when that's happened previously? Well, we have seen, for example, in the Russian Revolution of 1917, we see the bringing into being of a structure which is trying to kind of make real the dream of full equality of every citizen. Now of course it didn't turn out quite as rosy as the vision would have it. But that was at least at the heart of what was supposed to be happening. So we may well see another kind of dream kind of being made manifest here. Some kind of vision of full, perhaps somehow equality or connectivity. These are sort of Neptunian kind of significations, and so there is some possibility that we are actually seeing the war now. This is sort of this is the global conflict, and it's already underway, and that perhaps the sort of the resolution comes in 2026. Again, that doesn't kind of gel with the Uranus and Gemini. And we've already talked about how we're getting these conflicting testimonies, and this is the real challenge. This is why, we don't know exactly what's happening. We can only really come up with scenarios and think what's possible. And, I'd invite everybody who's watching to maybe think, which of these scenarios makes most sense to you. You'll probably all have your ideas, but it may well be that this is the truly challenging time, and it might grow in intensity before 2026, and then following that, Barbault does turn out to be right. There's some kind of settlement which allows us to move on. And I think what I thought was interesting is what you said earlier about the potential for technology to somehow play a role in this. You talked about the BRICS considering using Bitcoin as a currency of international settlement and so on. And if it's something like that, some use of the technology to create some new global settlement, that to me would sort of fit the symbolism. There's something that brings together the technological and the geopolitical into one, which does sort of honor that utopian vision that Barbault provided. And that's something that I think is also quite possible.
Yeah, something like a WHO digital health certificate with a real-time QR code tracking every member of the global community. Just to end on a little bit of levity there. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm rooting for like tech advancements. I do think this will be an ongoing story of how do we avoid dystopia and actually raise people up. And it turns out in the past, a lot of times the dystopian fears don't come true as much as the more optimistic side. I mean, if you just look at the invention of something like television, I guess it's certainly a dystopia if you think about people cracking out in front of the tube, but at the same time, you've had the ability to share ideas and share knowledge and share wisdom and share creativity. That's really ultimately what I think is the purpose of life, is the human creative impetus and then making that manifest and sharing. And for me, what's so interesting about the basket is the fire element is prominently featured with Aries and Leo, with Jupiter and Leo in that period. And I've seen some of the historical work I'm doing now that fire element really does bring out the best sometimes of what's possible in terms of the impassioned and the motivated and the sort of the imagination being then behind what we do, but we actually then bring it into reality through action and through work to make something manifest. So I'm excited about that. I think Saturn and Aries alone is going to soften things, and we really will birth some kind of newness. I mean, the last time it happened was in the mid-1960s. Saturn in Aries, Jupiter in Leo, right in 67-ish. And think about how cool that time was. New art, new music, all the stuff we still talk about. That's one of my next couple of videos people can look at. I'm going to talk about this little period in the mid-1960s, Saturn, Jupiter trine. Well, anyhow, I appreciate you joining me, Dan. It's been nice to update this ongoing astrology and check in with you and just get some of your thoughts here. Anything that you want to share about where people can find you? I know World Astrology Report YouTube is your channel. People go there, go subscribe. If you probably already all are subscribers, but where else can people find you, Dan? Do you offer any astrological services that people can come patron you with for anything like that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So aside from my presence on YouTube, I'm on Twitter at Dan W Astro, and yes, I offer private consultations. You can find me at danwaitesastrology.com. And I give private readings for people, helping them out with whatever they come to me with. I really like to try and help people find or identify things like purpose and calling. I have some techniques that I like to use for that. I use zodiacal releasing a lot, which is a pretty powerful timing technique, which can really kind of enlighten you as to kind of what sections of your life should you be looking at if you're trying to find purpose and meaning. When were you really living your purpose? And so that's something that zodiacal releasing can show you, that I like to do with my clients. But so you can find me there.
Beautiful. Yeah. And that was just going to ask you, well, what techniques are you, I'm curious more than anything, what techniques are you really using? Because I think a lot of times people should understand, or this is a primary consideration for when you think about astrological readings, is we all use different techniques. We all have our own pet techniques, you might say, that we discover. These techniques are how what I find most interesting, and I have my own version of that. But so that's cool. I'm glad you're into zodiacal releasing, and it's a pretty powerful technique I've seen. I mean, to break the life into chapters and see when things kind of peak and when they don't peak. So I'm glad you're in tune with that. And well, listen, it's been great. I hope we can have another update conversation, maybe, down the line at some point, and just kind of continue this as things unfold. So
yeah, thanks so much for having me, SJ. I'm honored to be on your channel after all this time. And yeah, it was a real pleasure. I'm sure we will talk again soon.
All right. Peace out, everyone. Take care, Dan. We'll talk to everyone later. Bye-bye.